Hello and welcome to the 40th session of the AI Safety Reading Group. And today we have read an article called Racing to the Precipice, a Model of Artificial Intelligence Development by Stuart Armstrong, Nick Bostrom and Carl Shillman. They are all working at the Future of Humanity Institute, or were in 2013 when the article was written. Nick Bostrom is the director, and Stuart Armstrong is a AI researcher, and Carl Shillman a research associate. So the topic at hand is AI arms race, which is of course a subject that a lot of people care about because it kind of looks like we are headed towards an AI arms race. Last week we read an article which strongly implied that the author believed that we were heading towards an AI arms race. And of course arms races have happened before in history. I've taken here a picture of HMS Dreadnought, which is, Chris will probably feel very proud by seeing this picture. A naval arms race which devastated Britain's economy and Germany's economy at the turn of the century. And that's because arms races are, in a very real sense, a zero-sum game. There might be a winner and a loser, but there's nothing really gained from an arms race. In this case, we are talking about, in particular, the effects of an arms race on safety precautions. So we are going to assume that safety precautions are possible, but you can choose what level of safety you want. A big point about an arms race is that there is a first past the post, a large advantage to reaching the goal first, and that's why you have this arms race. And there's some degree of enmity between the teams, meaning that the teams hate each other, and this influences what level of safety they are prepared to accept. There's an old saying just after the Second World War, which was "better red than dead," which was used as an argument by the peace movement, and which shows that it's better that the communists win the Cold War than that we all die. And many people reacted with the opposite and much more known slogan, "better dead than red," which represents full enmity, saying it's better that we die than that the communists win. So this has, in the paper by Bostrom and others, been formalized into a setting where there are a number of teams, here represented by the letter N. Each team has, there is a capability, which is each team, how good are they at making a superintelligence, and it's represented by a number from 0 to mu here, and each team choose a safety level which is from 0 to 1. Of course, you can rescale accordingly, and this allows each team to get a score. Now I hear myself again. Which is called C minus S, where the higher your capability is, the better you are at building it, and the more safety precautions you have, the worse it becomes. And this, after you've either won or lost this AI arms race, there might be a disaster, an AI catastrophe, and that is the probability S that you've chosen. So it's possible for a team to say, we want to be 100% sure that this doesn't make a catastrophe, and it's also possible to say we will 50% or even 1% chance of success is enough for us. And that's represented where catastrophe gives 0 utility and success gives 1 utility in this model. Further, there's a level of enmity, like I just said, where a number such as 1/4 means that an AI catastrophe is 4 times as bad as losing. So that would mean better red than dead in this case, where an enmity of 0 means you don't care about who wins. Enmity of 1 means that it's just better dead than red, really. And so the number mu up here is hugely important. This means how hard is it to build a superintelligence. If it's high, then capability matters more, and if it's low, then safety matters more, in the sense that if you skip on safety, then you increase your chance of winning a lot. So you can see mu is it represents in some way how much safety matters and compared to capability. The next part I'm hearing myself again, maybe through you, Erik. The next part is sorry, it's really difficult to talk. Is information levels. So the no information level, that's where no one has any idea about the other teams, and they don't know what their own capability is. And I'm saying this is roughly our where we are right now. Nobody has any clue about how hard it is to build a superintelligence, and they don't know how close others are either. Later, we will be at a point where some people can estimate, maybe only roughly, how far they are from building a superintelligence. And at some point, it will be obvious, not just to each team, how close they are to building a superintelligence, but also how close are their competitors. So these three information levels are modeled. In the first case, when no one has any clue, this is of course a fully symmetric situation. Every team will do exactly the same because none of them really knows anything. So everyone will choose the same safety level, and if there are 5 teams, then each have 1/5 chance of winning. And what safety level they should choose depends on how much they hate each other, the enmity, times the number of competing teams. If mu is smaller than this enmity times the number of teams, then the safety level should be reduced. So that is the optimal strategy, to reduce your safety level if you either if E is relatively high, or the capability is relatively low, or the number of teams is reasonably high. So this is and this is something that can be graphed, and we'll get to the graphs to get some visualization of this. But important thing is, if there's no information and the capabilities matter more than enmity times the number of teams, the correct option is to choose 100% safety. The next case is where everybody knows how good they are themselves, but they don't know how good the other teams are. So you know your capability, we write x here, and you choose a safety level S of x based on that. Of course, it's still symmetric, right? No one knows anything about the others, so each team will choose the same strategy. And the question is, what are the teams actually trying to obtain? And they're trying to not just maximize the chance that they are winning, but also the chance that they are winning and there's no AI catastrophe afterwards. So this is the total utility from both winning and avoiding AI catastrophe. And if there's low enmity, you add the risk that other teams win to that utility. So that is a somewhat more complex thing that each team is trying to do. And did that answer the question? Okay. So we see that the team with the highest capability always wins in this case. And that's because even if you add more safety, you would never, if you become slightly more capable, that it's always a bad strategy to add even more safety to compensate for that. That's x minus s and x. That's an increasing function. So it will always be the team with the highest x that wins. And what strategy you should follow depends on whether your capability is higher than enmity times number of teams minus the enmity plus 1. And this is proven in the paper and I won't go through the paper, but just say if your team is more capable, you'll choose 100% safety. If your team is less capable, you'll reduce the safety by your capability divided by this number here. And this is something that gives the total risk of catastrophe in this case is something that can be calculated as a moderately intimidating integral. It's for a mathematician, it probably doesn't look so scary, but it's reasonably. It's something that can be calculated and graphed, and I think that's the important part here. For public information, we are of course no longer in a symmetric case, because the team with the highest capability, they will have one strategy, and the teams with a lower capability, they will have a different strategy. And in this case, they choose a safety level determined by the difference between the capability of the top team and the second ranked team. That's the key thing that everybody will be looking at. So imagine there are like the Chinese AI and the American AI, and the American AI appears to be closer to becoming a super intelligence compared to the Chinese. Then the difference in the capability between the Chinese team and the American team becomes the crucial factor. And here we're looking for something called a Nash equilibrium. A Nash equilibrium is when no player has anything to gain by changing his strategy in isolation, meaning that there might be something better if two teams change the strategy at the same time. But in this case, if we restrict ourselves to looking at Nash equilibrium, where then the strategy that is best for the top team is to choose a safety level that is the difference divided by the enmity. In this case, the second team should not decrease its safety in order to be able to compete. And the risk of an AI catastrophe can be calculated. It's almost the same integral. So how does this look? There are actually five graphs in the paper, but let's have a look at this graph over here. We have two teams, and on the y-axis, the risk of a catastrophe, and that's what we really care about here. And on the horizontal axis, we have the relative importance of capability. So what we can see very, very clearly is the more capability matters, the lower risk of a catastrophe. Because you can see if capability doesn't matter, we'll go almost to 100% risk of catastrophe. If capability matters very much, we will get a decently low risk. I can just explain. The lowest line, the fully marked line, that's if there's no information. The dashed line here is if there's private information, and the brown line, I think, is if there is public information. So rather than going through these three graphs, I'll look at one variable at a time, and I'll scroll back and forth. So I'll go forward to mu, how hard the problem is. And obviously, as you can see from all these graphs, the further we get to the right, the lower the risk of a catastrophe. So in a way, we really hope that the problem is hard. That's not really something we can't influence this. We can't take any action that will make the problem of creating a superintelligence harder. We can. The only thing that the article suggests is we try to avoid easy solutions that might work, what they call a moonshot. That's probably a bad idea to do. So that's the first thing. The next is enmity. And here you have, in the first two graphs, you have 100% enmity, which is better dead than red. And in the second two, we have 50% enmity, where it's 2 times better to be red than to be dead. And as you can see, the graphs here compared to these have a substantially lower risk of catastrophe. So quite obviously, reducing enmity makes an AI arms race much less dangerous. And it should also be mentioned that these graphs with the public information assumes a Nash equilibrium. And if there's two teams, they might be able to coordinate in some way. One of the ways they could coordinate is by saying, both of them, we will not make an AI to kill everyone. We will, if we make a super intelligence, we'll use it to implement something like coherent extrapolated volition or something like that, which will dramatically reduce enmity. If they believe each other will do that, enmity will be reduced to zero. And when enmity is reduced all the way to zero, the risk of AI risk goes down to zero in this model. So in this case, and I think that's a really important point that they don't really go into. If we trust each other enough, the risk goes down to zero. If we, I think Erik has that. I like that point, but it's not really written in the article. The next question is information, where you have these three graphs: no information with the lowest risk in general, private information with somewhat higher, and usually you have public information at the top. But there are a few cases here where if you have low enmity and low importance of capability, there are some cases where it's slightly better to have public information, but in general private and no information is better. The last variable is the number of teams, and here you can, if you compare, it's not so easy to compare in this graphs whether this point is higher than this point. Here in the left it's 2 teams and in the right it's 5 teams. I'm hearing myself maybe through you, Chris. Okay, I'm maybe someone else. If you could, yeah, now it's better. Great. So it's not so easy to see whether the rightmost graphs are higher than the leftmost graphs. But if you eyeball, you can see more teams is generally worse. And if more teams are worse, it means that if we can convince teams to join up together to merge, then that will reduce the risk of AI catastrophe. There are a few cases where it does not hold, where more teams are actually safer, but that is a kind of a fringe effect, and it's really hard to split up a team in any meaningful way without capability from one team going to the other team. I mean, then they would have to forget some part of that, and that's probably not really feasible. That was the article. It's partly intuitive. The question is how intuitively, how do these graphs and the results in this paper match up to our intuition? And I would say reasonable on 3 out of 4 parameters. If we say how hard the problem is, one of the most negative on how hard the problem is Eliezer Yudkowsky, who has said he believes that safety to do this problem, safely compared to doing it unsafely, is it's 5 times as hard. That means that mu is 0.2. I'm hearing myself. Now it's gone. Okay, but we really hope this is not the case. because if it's 5 times as hard to do safe as it is to do unsafe, we will almost likely be in a situation where the best strategy is to choose as little safety as absolutely possible. I'm still hearing myself, sorry. If there's any way anyone could move their microphones away from the speaker, I would appreciate it. Is my microphone low? That might also be that's a good solution. Yes. So I think for the problem with how hard it is, the fact that we hope it's really hard compared to how much safety matters. We hope that safety is a tiny overhead to how hard it is to do build a super intelligence, but we don't really know. So I think this lines up very well with our intuition. Of course, enmity, we have this intuition that enmity is bad because we are social creatures. So we really hope from a moral point of view that enmity is bad, and it does turn out in this model that enmity is bad. And this also seems like from historical arms races like a very obvious result that aligns fully with our intuition that enmity is bad. It is if we can work to make Chinese AI project not be so afraid of the American AI project, that would be a really good thing. The last, if we take the number of teams, I also feel it's a reasonably intuitive result that if you have a lot of teams, then each team will feel under more pressure from the other teams, because if you really hate the others and there are hundreds of teams, then you will feel there's a very low chance that I will be able to succeed. So this means that if the number of teams just skyrockets, you will feel you will feel like you're in danger of losing, and you'll be very tempted to lower the safety level of your project. So I also feel that the number of teams, that it's bad to have many teams, and it's good if the teams merge. That lines up with intuition reasonably well. The last question is information, which is which does not line up with intuition. That no information is always best. I think Bostrom has later written quite a bit about that this actually, when you really think about it, it does make quite a bit of sense. He has talked about a veil of ignorance that will be lifted eventually when we get closer to building an actual superintelligence, and people will make different choices now that we don't know who's going to win. Then people will be very pro-social and say, oh, we don't know who will win, so we should all say that the winner should do coherent extrapolated evolution, or at least not take over the world, do something nice with the AI. That's what everybody is going to say now that there's no information, but later when it looks like they are winning, they will be much more reluctant to not take over the world. So I think if you think about it, the analysis probably makes sense. And what I've seen Bostrom write about this, everything he's written about this, whether this veil of ignorance is a good idea, he's written after this model. So there's at least potentially a chance that he built this model, saw this was an unexpected result, and thought long and hard about it, and actually changed his opinion about openness in AI based on this model. That was a long answer. Was that acceptable? Okay, then I will stop the recording. Thank you for watching. I will stop it now. See you next week.